Let's go ahead and cover how the Dule brush works. And this is a weird one. So let's start by just grabbing a snail. We'll do a couple of adjustments that we have just a sort of chain of snails and not too much more going on with our snail chain. That's about it. It's got some smoothing and nothing fancy. Now Dule brush does something interesting. I turn on Dule brush. Oops. I select this leaf. Oh my, what's going on here? Okay, so I don't know if you can make this out, but essentially leaves are, wow, this looks a little scary actually. Leaves are now being used like a cookie cutter to reveal the pattern of snails that are coming across. So we're only seeing the snail in leaves, but it's a little hard to see. Let's increase the size of that leaf. Can you see the leaf? Right here on the bottom, pointing with this snail antenna, this snail eye stalk. Right here we can see a leaf shape, and below it we see the snail stamp that we created. That's essentially how the Dule brush works. It creates cookie cutters to reveal the brush that you were working on before. And it has a handful of settings. You can increase or decrease the size, and we can see that it's going on. We can increase scatter, which I think is more fun. And so the scatter is bouncing around, but notice that even though the snails aren't overlapping again, let me clear this off. Even though I won't overlap the snails, the cookie cutter leaves are being stamped all over the place. So we're seeing more and more snails as I paint because of the massive amount of scatter. And if we do scatter on both axes, this will become an even greater amount. So look up top or in the middle while I just keep doing snails. You'll see more and more snails are being revealed because more and more leaf cookie cutters are being stamped out. Basically, it's a way of applying masks as you go through. So you don't have a whole lot of controls here. You have spacing for how close or far apart the second brush that you've selected is. You have size for how big that second brush is, and remember this brush is like a little cookie cutter going on. You have scatter, which you'll remember from our scattering how that behaves and functions. We can bring them close or farther apart, do it on a single axis or on both axes. You have count, which again, if you think back to the Batman being stamped everywhere, it's the number of cookie cutters now being applied everywhere. So you can see all these leaf shapes being cut in. So that's most of it, but there are two more sets. There is the mode that it's being revealed in. And again, we'll cover how modes behave a little bit later in the semester. But for now, it's essentially a way that the brush is blending in on top of each other as it goes through. So that's about it, except you can also randomly flip them around, also like the scattering. So you can get more or fewer cookie cutters like flipped upside down. Well, not more. You can get some of them up right side up, some of them flipped upside down as it goes through. And again, the mode will make more or less sense depending on linear height's usually pretty good, depending on what set of brushes you're using. So in this case, instead of a full cookie cutter, at this point, it's stamping different colors of leaf on top of it. And now one thing that I often forget, and I'll be honest, I forgot to look this up before I recorded this video. Let's see if that is controlled by the background color. No, it's not. That's a bummer. Okay. So again, we'll cover what all these modes do in a later part of the semester, but do play with them and you'll see that they have different effects depending on if there's gray or only black and white inside of your inside of your tip that is being used as the Dule brush cookie cutter. Because while I'm saying it's a cookie cutter, we all know that it's really a masking type. And we've played a lot with masks, and so it's cutting or chopping and mixing around the mask, but that has its own little layer going on and some blending mode for the mask. I don't think we've done blending modes on masks yet because that gets weird and tricky. We'll have to talk about that later in the semester. Right now, I'm just going to draw a little bit more on it. So that's essentially the Dule brush. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you. Just even though it's a little incorrect, think of it as a cookie cutter revealing the pattern below. And you can set that cookie cutter to be like wildly stamping all over the place up and down. Anyway, that's the Dule brush. Next up, we're going to do color dynamics and then transfer. I guess we'll cover brush pose. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense until we're working with other brushes. It does affect other things like the, as you saw the brush projection that's controlled by brush pose when you're using a mouse. Oh, heads up too. We have transfer, but that's not called transfer on older versions of Photoshop. It's called other dynamics. It's the same thing. We'll cover that one in a minute. First up, we are going to cover color dynamics. So see you next video.